Hello, guten Tag und grüß Gott. Today is Sunday, July the 2nd, 2023. And this is actually my second video because I had an entire first video with my wife Marge talking about the Supreme Court and the latest decisions that came down last week from the Supreme Court. So what I want to do is I want to continue in the spirit of Newswit with, the news of the times. So my Wall Street Journal of June 23rd, Friday, June 23rd, says, Titanic sub imploded, 5 dead. So what is this saying here? It's saying the Titanic sub imploded. What Titanic sub? I mean, yes, we heard that there was a sub missing that was taking people to see the Titanic, but the name of the sub was the Titan. So in order to talk about this a little bit, because now a week has gone by and we've actually raised some pieces up from the submarine that did implode, I've invited my son Patrick, who did some research on this, and we want to just talk about the sub and what happened, and what has been discovered to date, and what is the future of extreme tourism into the depths of the sea. This Titanic is down 2.5 miles below sea level, and the pressures are 6,000 psi or better, and here we're living at 14.7. Even going into outer space, you can only lose 14 pounds, but imagine what happens when you go down. Anyway, so Patrick, can you kind of bring us up to date as to how this whole adventure began? Who was all involved, maybe? Or whatever else you want to just talk about.
So I want to start off by saying that only some of the wreckage has been recovered so far, and as of this time, they are still searching the seafloor for additional wreckage. So, it's been several days since they discovered it. It's already made it to shore, but they're still looking for more. So we're not going to know for sure what happened, possibly forever, but most likely for a few months, if not a year, as the investigation goes on. The investigation's being two main bodies are dealing with it. One of them is the United States Coast Guard, and the other one is the Canadian Maritime Association. I'm not exactly sure what their name is, but the United States Coast Guard really took the point lead on that for a while, which was always a question of legality. How do they get to investigate the situation, considering that it was not a U.S. flagged vessel involved and they didn't leave a U.S. port. But no one seemed to really care, since it is a U.S. company and stuff like that that's involved. The Coast Guard is involved. But I got confirmation today that the Canadians are looking into this too, because it was a Canadian flagged vessel that left a Canadian port that had this incident happen.
But the sub was not a Canadian sub, right?
No, arguably the sub was a private sub that belonged to no country, which is really interesting. But I think that's a really hollow argument, and it's going to be considered American. The company that built it is American. The company that operated it is American. It's going to be an American situation. I think that's why the Coast Guard is saying they have jurisdiction. But there's a few big misconceptions that need to be kind of dealt with. One, I want to be very clear, I'm not an expert in submersibles or anything of that nature. I've just watched and synthesized a bunch of other people's reviews of the situations and am fairly familiar with the exploration of the Titanic well before this. Um,
You mean the Ballard explanation?
oh no! People have been down on the Titanic for a long time now. Since it was discovered in the 1980s, there has been so many expeditions to the Titanic that parts of it have collapsed under the weight of the monuments that people have left on it.
Oh my.
People have been saying for years, including Ballard, that the Titanic is being destroyed by people loving it too much.
Yeah.
There was a disaster with a Russian submarine a number of years back where they couldn't control their descent for a while and ended up landing right on top of the Titanic with a rather hefty thump and knocked down one of its decks.
That sub must have collapsed too, huh?
No.
It did not.
Yeah, in fact, this is the deepest a submarine has ever been lost before, and a lot of people are saying this is the deepest a sub has ever been lost, and will probably be the deepest a submarine has ever been lost, because we're pretty good at exploring the deep sea. It's just expensive and difficult. You know, even the CEO of this company constantly says, well, you know, all the errors that happen with deep sea submersibles happen because of user error, not mechanical error. It's because we kind of got it figured out what it takes to do this. In fact, people have been doing tourist expeditions to the Titanic now for well over a decade. You've been able to go to the Titanic, and for relatively inexpensively.
And the Titan itself evidently has gone some 20 times.
Yeah, so I'm not exactly certain as how many times the Titan itself has been down to Titanic depths. There's some misleading things there. So what people need to understand about the Titan is the Titan was the second or possibly third, because like I said, there's lots of contradictory information floating around right now about it, vessel that OceanGate operated. At least the first two were named the Cyclops and the Cyclops 2. And I believe, and I could be wrong, but I believe that the Titan is the renamed Cyclops 2. Titan was named Titan because there was a book written before the Titanic sunk about a ocean liner that sank on its maiden voyage because it struck an iceberg on its way from the UK to the United States. And the ship's name was the Titan. And that book came out like a decade or so before the events of Titanic happened.
Jesus.
And so a lot of people are like saying, oh, the guy's a prophet or whatever. But
yeah.
Anyway, so that's why it was named the Titan. You hear a lot of people say that it was named after that book that predicted the Titanic. As far as I know, the book wasn't titled the Titan. It was just that the ship in the book was named the Titan.
But this whole thing, you know, about names, I don't know. Of course, it's late. You can ascribe significance to the names right now. I mean, first of all, the company's name was Ocean
Gate.
Ocean Gate. You know, it's almost like Watergate. You know, like it was doomed to have some sort of a problem. And then, you know, of course, the Titan and the Titanic. You know, oh man, you know.
Well, so. I actually have a little bit of a personal connection to this whole situation because I was interested in this all the way back in 2021. OceanGate was supposed to start operating in 2020, but you know we all know what happened in 2020, so they weren't able to start operating until 2021. And I started getting targeted advertisement from them back then, and I thought it was really neat. And the original pitched proposal was, you know, $200,000 or $250,000, and you get to go out on 3 or 4 dives, where it'd be 2 dives to shallow water, close to rescue. They actually made a big deal about this, like they would be taking place in the Caribbean. We're going to be near inland, and you're going to get to learn how the vessel works and all that. And then later, you would come back and do the Titanic dive.
Oh, with other vessels, right? Or the Titanic itself being deployed in all these
Well, the point was that you'd go down on the same type of submersible
Oh, okay.
early on and get training on how to operate, in this submarine.
How to function in it.
Yeah,
Right.
because their advertisement was, and how they kind of skirted the legal aspect of it, is that you weren't a paying passenger, you were a mission specialist.
Oh, okay.
So,
And you paid for the privilege of being a mission specialist.
yeah,
Okay.
and to be fair on their part, $250,000 is less than what it would cost to send you to the Titanic. So they're not making money off of this. But I have the ad right here in front of me. It says Ocean Gate Expeditions. Check the rarest bucket item on Earth off your list. The Titanic. Reward yourself and see it in person. An epic voyage to the world's most famous shipwreck. Become a mission specialist. Secure a spot before they sell out. I saw this and was completely enamored with it as soon as I saw it.
Wow.
I just, there's no justifying $250,000 to go visit it.
Right.
Even though, like I said, that's one hell of a deal. Particularly if they did end up including those official dives, because one of them was one of those prep dives was that you got to go down into the Mariana Trench. Now, not as deep as all that. Just do a dive in the Mariana Trench.
That's down like 5 or 6 miles, isn't it, or 10 miles?
I'm not familiar.
It's really huge.
The point being is that they originally offered a lot more than they offered these people. The impression I'm getting this time is that these people who went on this last expedition just went to the Titanic. That there was no preparatory work or anything.
Right.
They just went to the Titanic.
So they did go with a big ship there, didn't they?
Yeah, a Canadian flagged vessel.
Okay.
Which weirdly had no ROV support of its own. So like they couldn't send down an ROV.
Okay.
Just really a remotely operated vehicle, which is kind of weird. To get a couple other misconceptions out of the way, why didn't it have a chain that went all the way down to the bottom of the ocean?
2.5 mile chain.
It's not the length of the chain; it's the weight of the chain that's the problem.
Yeah.
The weight of the chain would be nearly impossible to pull back up on the vessel.
Yeah.
Regardless of the vessel at the end of it. Just to give you a little bit of evidence of that, when a ship drops its anchor, if the ship is of any reasonable size, it ain't the anchor that's holding the ship in place. It's the weight of the chain that's holding the ship in place.
Oh, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way.
Oh, yeah, no, that's what it is. The anchor is just supposed to anchor the chain in place so that the chain has a spot to go, and then it kind of acts as a shock absorber, because you have to lift this chain off the ocean bottom. It's also why you really want to wash your train when you pull it back in, because it's covered in mud because it's sitting on the bottom of the ocean. But anyway, point being, that want to get that out of the way right away.
Well, wait a minute. How deep can you put an anchor?
Chain down?
Yeah.
I don't know. And there are ROVs that can be cabled all the way up to the surface from the Titanic.
Really?
Yeah, but we're talking about thin cables. I don't think they can haul the ROV
almost
up.
like a wire, right?
Yeah, it's an umbilical.
Mm-hmm.
So some other misconceptions about the Titan. A lot of people make fun of the game controller. And on the flip side, they'll say, no, game controllers are used by the military. This is all cool. All right, so from what I've heard from naval personnel, game controllers are not used for anything mission critical. Just, they're used for convenience, not mission critical components. Next, they're always wired, because you don't want to have a Bluetooth issue. Now, this is not me speaking from personal experience, but this is me collating the conversations of 3 separate people who have worked in the U.S. Navy on submarines. In addition to that, though, on the opposite side of the scenario, Ocean Gate always sent their people down with 3 different controllers. So if one failed, they did have backups.
Mm-hmm.
So at least it wasn't that bad. And also, in addition, they basically treated this whole thing of, if something goes wrong, we're going to the surface. if the controller has an issue or whatever, we're going to the surface.
Right.
And the rationale behind that is the submarine actually had a 10-hour shelf life. So from the time it hit the water to the time it started going back to the surface is a maximum of 10 hours. Is at 10 hours, the ballast on the submarine would drop itself. And it would be forced to the surface. So as long as they weren't tangled up in anything, they're good. And actually, it's really funny. You'll see a lot of people saying like, "Oh, there's all these entanglement hazards on the Triton." Well, yes and no. It did have those, but almost all of those were designed to fall off the Triton, so that it could go to the surface. Triton, or the Ocean Gate, claimed that Triton had over 7 different ways to reach the surface. In addition to that, of course, they had this 96-hour oxygen reserve, and yes, they did. They weren't that stupid. They had carbon dioxide scrubbers and stuff like that. They also had the capability of supplying emergency breathing air to everyone on board for about 3 to 4 hours, which may not sound like much, but the point was, if there was an electrical fire or something inside the sub, you could put the fire out and go to the surface.
Right.
The whole joke about, well, it works on one button is not a joke. The submarine had one button you could press, and then it would just go to the surface. There was no override or anything like that. Once the button was pressed, the submarine would go to the surface. And like I said, it had a bunch of different ways to get to the surface. Another thing you'll hear is it was locked in. People were locked in. That's pretty typical. What's not typical is not having a way to open up for air.
Well, how did they even deal with decompression, or did they have to deal with decompression? You don't really
have to deal with
to.
decompression because you're under a normal atmosphere
Right.
inside. If it were pressurized to the same outside pressure or whatever, you wouldn't have had.
Well, you wouldn't need that.
happen. So,
But the thing is, I always think of, even though you're in an airplane, at 40,000 feet, I think they only pressurize to about to make you feel like you're about 12,000 feet or so.
yeah.
So. But anyway, this the construction of the.
Yeah.
Give us a little bit of that kind of.
Like I said, we really need to wait until everything comes out, but there's a few interesting points. One, you'll hear people say, there's never been a submersible made out of carbon fiber before. This is not true. There have been multiple submersibles made out of carbon fiber before. They are usually incredibly shallow diving, or they're one-time use. Carbon fiber has no way of checking that it was done correctly that is non-destructive. So like with titanium or whatever, you can take ultrasounds of it and make sure there's no voids in the metal or anything like that. With carbon fiber, you can't do that. You just kind of have to hope.
Well, the carbon fiber is layered, right?
Yeah, it's layered, and it was, from what I heard, it was 5 inches deep, which was considered the absolute minimum for this depth. Unconfirmed reports, and I want to say unconfirmed is unconfirmed, that people on board the ship were saying that it was physically spongy to the touch because it was getting old. Also unconfirmed reports, I've heard some people say that this particular submarine was 4 or 5 years old, and other people saying that the submarine was less than a year old. So like I said, there's a lot of misinformation out there. If it was 1 year old and spongy, that's pretty awful. If it was 5 years old and spongy, why would you go down in it? But
So,
more understandable.
So what is the preliminary direction, if there is any direction to be given, in terms of future submersibles at that depth?
Oh, so a lot of people are saying that this is the end of private ocean exploration. That this shouldn't have been allowed, and so on and so forth. And while yes, I don't think you should be allowed to take people down into the ocean without explaining to them the risks that there was what's going on. If you read the disclaimer and all that, while not a legally sound enough document, These people very well knew that this might end in their death. The CEO of the company was so confident in his product that he was willing to go down in it and died in it.
Yeah.
So it's not like he thought the corners were cut that severely.
Right. Even though the rumor said he bought some sort of second-grade carbon fiber from Boeing.
Yeah. So there's a lot of reports that he bought expired carbon fiber from Boeing. Okay, let's look at that 3 separate ways. One, that could be a lie because that's from a disgruntled employee. And on the flip side of that, Boeing has said that they never sold him any product. So there's that. 2, we
3.
know. 2.
2.
We know that Triton has built multiple submarines. So OceanGate has built multiple submarines. So what if they bought this expired carbon fiber just to test to see if their lace method works and all that?
Okay, so they could have bought carbon fiber, but it wasn't necessarily in that.
in this vessel. So we don't know any of this.
Yeah.
And then third, let's say that they did use expired carbon fiber and that they did use it on a real vessel. We don't know that it was the Cyclops 2, the Titan that used the expired thing. So we don't know that expired stuff was even used. That could be a lie. We don't know if it was used in an actual submarine or not. And even if it was used in a submarine, we don't know that it was this submarine.
Yeah.
So like I'm saying, there's information out there, and you can look at all this stuff and you should analyze it all, but we're not going to know for a few months what truly happened.
All right.
The only thing we can say for sure is that the pressure vessel failed for some reason, whether that be because of poor design, poor materials, overuse, what have you. The pressure vessel failed, and because of that, everyone on board died.
So would you agree that, number one, if you were going to build a submersible, and I've actually heard you say that you wanted to build a submersible when you were about 8 years old. If you were going to build a submersible, would it be cylindrical?
So the way to do this, there's an obvious way to do this. If you want to do this, you put, and I don't know why no one suggested this. By the way, the fact that no one suggested this should make you really skeptical that this is actually the way to do this. But would be to make 4 or 5 standard spherical pods. Please remember, all the deep submersibles are spheres of titanium with a door. Whatever you see on the outside of it isn't pressurized. So it's open to the ocean and it can do its thing. But there's a sphere, there's a core of titanium in that. So why not make, 3 or 4 or 5 of these things and put them next to each other as one big unit, and then go down and, do your thing and then come back to the surface that way. And then hell, even if one of the pressure hulls fails, not everything's over.
Yeah.
And then you don't have to deal with the sphere or the thing. You can mass produce these spheres. You don't have to make just one-offs. It just seems like the obvious answer to, I want more people on a submarine at depth.
And that's why we should be skeptical about
and
that.
That's why we should be skeptical of it. Yeah, because
it's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So people are saying, according to you, that this is the end of deep sea exploration and so on.
No.
Which is
deep sea exploration for private venture.
Private venture, yeah. I hear you see Virgin areas going up into outer space. And
there's already talk about that being shut down because of this too.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So they're basically are going to put some sort of like a Mercury capsule up there, because it's kind of cool to be in some sort of a pod, have people sitting around the windows, and look at the Earth and look at the stars and that kind of thing. And then they're going to drop it into the ocean, That's really something. So anyway, thank you so much, Patrick, for coming here. Do you have anything else that you might want to say on this? Because we'll probably do a Titanic sub-imploded
update
story.
In a few months. Okay.
Probably should do an update. Yeah.
The main thing I would caution you to do is, if there's a news story that interests you, One, give it 24 hours before you take anything as real. Two, go and look at multiple sources and see where they contradict each other, and do the contradictions make sense? Okay, like I said, the good example is the expired carbon fiber.
Mm-hmm.
One person says it was expired, one person says it wasn't. Does that contradiction make sense? It could. And then thirdly, always be willing to change your mind on what the situation was when all the details have been hashed out. And that may take a few years. Like with the Columbia disaster, we all kind of knew what happened with the Columbia disaster almost day one.
Right.
But it wasn't for 3 or 4 years till we knew what happened. And so I would say that is like, don't let your mind solidify that this is the way things are until some time has passed.
Yeah, and people are so ready to jump on the internet and talk about this and talk about that. So anyway, thank you so much for taking the time to do this with me. And it took a little bit of cajoling, but my son Patrick, what a guy. And with that, I think I'm going to conclude this video because it's like 26 minutes long. And I'm going to cover some other stories. Maybe I'll make a third video. Who knows? This has been the day of videos for me. In any case, I bid you farewell. So long. Auf Wiedersehen. And we must infect the universe with us.